Welcome everyone to AI in RCM, how you can save time and money. So why are we here today? Well, AI is maturing rapidly. Everyone is talking about it. Last 10 to 15 years, we've seen it just grow exponentially in capabilities, in concept. It's kind of started to leach in more and more and more into the RCM space. The tools are becoming more accessible and cheaper. More providers are interested in it. More vendors are responding by providing more point solutions, more focus on it, more conversations. As I said, everyone's thinking about this. We're here today talking about it. It's at HFMA, it's at AHAM, Becker's, in your Fierce News articles. It's everywhere. It's hard to step anywhere in RCM now without stepping on something related to AI. Despite all this focus, despite all this energy, all this attention in this field, still 30% of digital transformations result in a negative ROI. That's 3 out of 10. That's significant. You wouldn't think with all the focus and attention and years of experience and maturity that we'd be still suffering from 3 out of 10 failures, but that's the marketplace today. So why is that happening? What's causing that? Today, we're going to go through 3 objectives. Fina, if you go to the next slide. First, we're going to analyze the current state of the industry. Then we're going to go through some common use cases as well as emerging use cases, kind of those pioneers in the field. And then finally, Helen, my colleague, is going to take us through a use case and apply the different techniques that we're going to talk about to show how it can be used appropriately and to generate the best outcomes possible. Hopefully avoid being one of those 3 and 10 negative ROI results. First up, though, a little bit about myself and Helen. We both work at Advata. Advata is an advanced analytics software company at the intersection of data science and revenue cycle. I've been in revenue cycle for 9 years, spent time in billing, follow-up, cash posting, customer service, really all the back-end functions. And I've been fortunate enough to bring this experience into product with Advata. Now, Helen's been in revenue cycle almost 15 years and is an expert in customer success. Helen also has a specific emphasis on the back-end processes. Helen and I are very fortunate to work together daily to build the best tools for our customers at Advata. Now, Advata would love to be your technology partner. So if at the end of this presentation, you have additional questions, ideas, concepts you'd like to go through, or if we say something that you completely disagree with, I would love to hear from you. You'll see our contact information at the end. Fina, if you'll take us through the next slide. Okay, so let's start off with the poll. What is your organization's experience with AI? Now, at the top of the screen, or perhaps on the side of the screen, you'll see the different options, and one of them should say polls, or if you're on an iPad, I believe there's if you click the 3 dots, then you can click on polls. Now, really, when you're answering this, it's just a primer for the conversation today. Where are you in your process with AI? What are you thinking about? What are you after? I really want you to be thinking about what you want to take away from this conversation. So let's just take 30 seconds and we'll answer the poll, and then we'll continue. Okay, I can see a lot of people are currently using AI. That's great. So maybe you're here just to see what some of the other use cases are in the industry, or even the pioneering use cases, the emerging ones. We're in the process of assessing our options with AI is also a common response. You want to build your own, a little bit more uncommon response, but it's out there. That's great. You're in the right place. We use an AI vendor, but the AI didn't go the way they said it would, and didn't really like the ROI there. Yep, understood. Great, so a little bit of everything. Fina, if you'll keep us moving here. Okay, so let's do some level setting. In the marketplace, there's a lot of buzz about these different topics, and sometimes these words aren't really used in the right capacity. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. And that way, if you're going out to talk to vendors more about these topics, you're also armed with what they really mean when they're saying these different things. So first, artificial intelligence, AI, it's why we're all here today talking. This is a commonly used phrase, and it's been around for quite a bit. This is really where machines are making autonomous decisions based on the environment they're in, the data they have to kind of get to an outcome that you desire. I won't spend too much time on that. I really want to focus a little bit more in on predictive modeling, machine learning, and RPA. Those are the ones that typically I find in the marketplace people know less about. and struggle with, especially as vendors are pushing these topics more and more and more towards providers. So with predictive modeling, this is where we're taking historical data, we're passing it through a model to predict the future. Machine learning, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in a second, but let me also bring you up to speed on machine learning, ML. This is where we're doing the same thing. Machine learning is actually a type of predictive modeling. So we still want to take historic data and predict the future. But now with machine learning, we want to take it one step further, and we actually want to enable the software to learn and improve on its own without additional programming. Let me give you an example of how these two play together, predictive modeling and machine learning. So let's say you're a provider and you want to increase your collection rate for patient statements in a specific zip code. And you could either be interested in improving the collections, or you could be interested in just the patient satisfaction. There's a number of things you could be wanting to improve. So what you would do is you would feed the historic information for that zip code's patient statements into this predictive model, and the predictive model would go through it, understand where you've been, kind of what those different things that you've tried, where they led to the outcomes, and then it would produce these future outcomes. If you keep going at the rate you're going in the way that you're going with these statements, you'll have outcome X. Now, you may or may not be happy with that. If you're not happy with that, then you yourself need to start tweaking some of the dials. Okay, maybe when we sent the statements every 4 days, it was too much and people didn't like it and our patient satisfaction scores plummeted. Or maybe we weren't clear enough upfront at time of service about how much a patient's going to owe, and they kind of are disheartened when they receive the statement and they just don't want to deal with it, so they don't pay their bill. But you have to make those decisions and make those kinds of adjustments to decide what to do. If instead you had machine learning capability involved, the software itself, and if it had the autonomy and kind of you gave it the ability to do these things, the software itself would do those A/B tests. So, for example, it might start doing for within the zip code specific neighborhoods, send invoices that are all in black to one neighborhood and all in red to another neighborhood, and then compare the results. And then same thing for the timing, send it every 4 days or every 1 month, every 30 days. As it's doing these different A/B tests, it's understanding, ooh, that worked really well, or oh boy, that really didn't work. And it's going to adjust. Okay, all in black was pretty good, all in red was terrible. Let's try mostly in black, but maybe we just make the amount they owe in red. Things like that. Think those small adjustments. And each time the program's improving and improving and improving, getting closer and closer to that desired outcome. So machine learning, when it's used correctly, and it has the right data underneath it, the right access to processes, we're going to talk about those two things a lot more today, data and processes, it can be a very powerful tool for getting you to the outcomes you desire. Let's move on to robotic process automation, RPA. This is another topic that's been on a lot of people's lips the last few years here. And this has a great role in our industry. RPA is, simply put, the ability for software to mimic a user's keystrokes and mouse clicks. Where this is really valuable, RPA, it's very valuable where you have common repetitive tasks that are happening lots and lots of times per day. So if one person in the back end and follow up would work 40 accounts per day, and they're performing the same function 100 times per day or 20 times per day, some high volume amount of touches, and you've got a huge team of people. So that's a lot of hundreds or thousands of similar activities each day or each week. That could be a good candidate for RPA. One of the most common examples of this is claim status checking. They're pulling up an account and they're seeing, okay, we sent out a claim to payer X, and I don't know what's happened since then. I need to go to the payer website and check on it before I call them or kind of take any other action. RPA is a great way to reduce your resource costs on a lot of these common, simple tasks. Business intelligence, BI reports, something I'm sure all of you are very familiar with. These have been around for decades. BI software is a great way to take loads of data, pass it through this intelligence, and it spits out information that you can actually digest and understand, whether that's in a visual, a trend table, a pattern, any sort of human digestible format. Business intelligence continues to be a very valuable way to understand lots of data and kind of see where we have been historically and where we are today, and allows you to make connections that otherwise could be quite difficult without these tools. All right, so went through those fairly quickly. These are tools in a toolbox. I want you to think of this as a set of tools, transformation toolbox. Maybe artificial intelligence is your hammer, predictive modeling is your screwdriver, machine learning maybe is your sawzall. They're all different tools. And depending on the job you're after, the outcome, the project, you're going to need a different set of these tools. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but keep that in mind. Transformation toolkit. And if you go to the next slide. Okay. So let's talk about common use cases. What are people doing today and how well does it work? Now, for the most cases these six use cases are used quite frequently and are relatively accepted in the marketplace. I'm going to go through just a few of these. In predictive analytics, for example, we've got price transparency. Now, especially in the last few years, there's been a lot of media attention about surprise billing. So there's been a lot more energy and effort to provide patients an estimate of how much they're going to owe at time of service. In order to do that, it requires massive amounts of data. We need to know a lot about historical information to predict the future. How much is this patient going to owe when they leave the building? They're here now, they're about to have their service. We have a general expectation about the service. There might be additional add-ons we don't know about. We need to know about their insurance. There's a lot of information there. That uses predictive analytics to come to those outcomes. In the machine learning space, transcription services, even outside the RCM space, if you think of Google on your phone or Siri, and you're asking them for directions to a market, or perhaps you're a doctor and you want to transcribe your notes into something that someone can use as text for coding, for example. This is using machine learning. If you're someone like me that's been using these services, especially I use Google Maps all the time, and in the car I love to speak to Google Maps. It was terrible 10 years ago. It's getting better, but it's gotten significantly better in the last 10 years. Still, sometimes it doesn't quite understand my dictation, but it is getting better. That's due to machine learning, this ability to kind of process information, try these A/B tests. I think you meant this. Oh, you didn't. You really meant that. And it continues to get better and better over time. RPA space, I already talked about claim status checking. Eligibility checks is the same idea, where you're going out to a website, entering basic demographic information, pulling back the patient's eligibility for that insurance, and bringing it back into the host system, the EMR, thereby kind of reducing the load that users might have to otherwise perform these activities. So these are common use cases, but they're not perfect. There are a couple concerns you need to focus on. Data, for one. If the data underneath is unreliable, it's not standard, it's not specific, that can really make it difficult to achieve any of these use cases. The second one is when the workflows aren't integrated well together. And I'm going to give you an example of both of these. Take an inpatient claim, for example. So you're a provider, you've got this inpatient claim, they've been there for several weeks or several months. There are services from multiple departments on that inpatient claim. And when it comes time to do the coding, the computer-assisted coding, let's say you're using 3M, which is a really common company that does this. That technology requires that you have the data kind of integrated well together. If those multiple departments are using different EMRs and the data underneath aren't really following the same schema or same kind of layering, it's very, very difficult for 3M to bring that together into a valuable recommendation on what to do during the coding process. So one thing to really consider as you're thinking through these processes, or perhaps there are a few people that said they've done AI in the past and didn't have the ROI they expected. It could be that the data underneath didn't really flow well together, or the processes involved in the thing you're trying to automate, it doesn't really lend itself to such automation. So two things to keep in mind. Now, on the positives, these common use cases have been around for a while. More vendors are into it, more providers are into it. The result is it's getting cheaper. It's very accessible. You could probably type any of these into Google right now, and you'd see lots of vendors offering their services to provide these things. Yep, point solutions broadly available. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about those pioneering emerging use cases. So the last slide was the common use cases. Now we're going to talk about kind of cutting edge. What are people doing, kind of risking it all, so to speak, to do something that's really pesky for them. They want to provide some sort of data science technique to get better at it. In the predictive analytics space, predicted denials is a big one. This is the ability to predict a denial before the claim even leaves the building. What's the likelihood, based on historical information, that this claim with this set of services is going to deny when I send it to payer Y? And if it's above this a threshold, if it's 99% likely to deny, well, let's not bother sending the claim out. Let's revisit it. Let's look at it together. What can we change about this claim before we send it out to reduce that chance of denial? In the machine learning space, we're actually going to talk about process mining a little bit later. It's a really neat method for digesting a large-scale process into small components and visually identifying where there are loops or bottlenecks or other things that make the process not flow the way you'd like it to. On the RPA front, the appeals process, that's a great example. The appeals process from a follow-up perspective is a significant time suck. It's very expensive. Usually you have got subject matter experts and they all like their own appeal template, and some are more successful than others, especially based on the payers they're referencing. Instead, vendors are taking that appeal process and providing some layer of automation. Perhaps there's a library of appeals that are presented to the user when the denial comes in. And based on the denial and the payer, the software recommends a particular appeal template, fills it out for the user. The user simply clicks print or send it, and it takes a potentially 10, 15, 20-minute activity into a 1-minute activity. These are some of the emerging pioneering things that are going on in the space. Now, because they are these emerging products, they're unproven. They're really being done at limited facilities, and they're slowly getting better over time. And of course, they're not fully integrated into workflows. They're kind of, let's see if we can do this, and if it works well, then we'll get it kind of deeper into the process. Fina, if you'll take us to the next one. Okay, so talked about the transformation toolkit, went through some use cases. Now let's talk about how those tools come together. Now, in most cases, you're not going to want to just take one of these tools and pursue an opportunity. It may work, you might get a small improvement, but more than likely, if you're going to invest in this technology, you really want to see a meaningful improvement. So you're going to want to use a handful of these tools to achieve that goal. So how do they all come together? Well, let's go through this visual, and we'll start with data. So the first thing you need to do is collect your data. Where am I today? Business intelligence reports are a great way for understanding where I am today. You can digest a lot of information there. Process and task mining, we talked about that already. Really easy way to understand where your barriers are in your current flow. Once you understand the summation of where you are, then you can process that through to where am I going? Insights, predictive modeling. I'm going to take this information, pass it through a predictive model. I want to see where I'm headed. If you're unhappy with where you're headed, which is most likely the case if you're going through this process, then you're going to want to take action. You're going to want to change something. Can I introduce RPA? Do I need to change my workflow? Let's go back to the process and task mining and understand where the barriers were and what do I need to do to tweak those things. Once you've taken that action, then there's a marination period, a waiting time for those actions to take place and impact the outcome you're looking at. Once you've waited 3, 6 months, 9 months, depending on the thing that you're trying to change, you're going to repeat this process. Again, pull up the new data and business intelligence reports, review the process and task mining. How did we do? Predictive modeling. Are we headed in the right direction? Perhaps you were going for a 5% improvement in this process and you only achieved a 2% improvement. Well, how do we obtain that additional 3%? So these tools, you could just use one of these tools to try to get at that outcome, but you're going to have much better luck, and it's a much more comprehensive approach to take all of them or a handful of them together to achieve this kind of constant improvement wheel. Now, the technical term for this is an Intelligent Business Process Management Suite, IBPMS. I prefer Transformation Toolkit, but if you go out in the marketplace, you might see IBPMS out there for different versions of this. Fina, if you go to the next slide. All right, so let's take a second poll. And then when we come back, Helen is going to take us through a case study.
Right. Well, it looks like as we're doing this poll that everybody is kind of front, back, and anywhere. Ooh, anywhere is getting a little bit higher. So that's interesting. It's not surprising. I think there's applications absolutely across the revenue cycle. And especially this day and age when we're in that time period where we have short staff and we're trying to figure out what can we do to help in this time, help fill those gaps. So I want to pivot quickly to a case study to talk about, to kind of put together everything that Hunter just talked about with the transformation toolkit. So one example across every single organization I've ever worked for, it seems to be a universal problem that I've always run into is how do we handle small balances? Our low balance AR, it's challenging, it's high volume, we get very little return on that work, and it's just endless. So what do we do? And so let's talk through a group that we work with. They're a mid-sized hospital organization thinking about just a little bit under $2,500 and below, and see the results that we were able to achieve while applying this toolkit. Next slide, please. So I think most of us are all aware of this. We aren't working all of our AR if we're on the if you're in the back end or you're in PFS. You're spending a lot of time on your high dollars, and you should, right? You're sorting high to low. That's where you get the best yield. And the labor cost to collect is roughly the same for a $10,000 account as it is for a $100 account. So why would you spend time on all the low dollar accounts if you're at the deficit of the high dollars? You wouldn't. So when we think about that, if you look at this graphic, it's really showing you that the low volume, the value accounts are 85% of the volume. That's a massive amount of volume. And you're only going to get 4% of your NPSR from that. And so you're not talking about to work those balances and to get through all of those accounts, adding 2, 3, 4 people. We're talking about tripling, quadrupling, even 5 times the staffing required in order to successfully work all of these accounts and be staffed appropriately. And so what do you do in that instance? Well, that's where you have to start applying that transformation toolkit. So I'd like to walk through this example and show you what we did with this group we were working with. Next slide, please. So the first thing we did is we used the business intelligence. Now, this is not necessarily brand new technology, right? It evolves, and every year it becomes better and better and better. But it's still some of the stuff that all of us in the PFS world or in operations have done for years and years and years. And that's we continually look at our denial clusters. We look to see if the payers are changing things so that we now have false denials. We look to see if everything's posting correctly. So there's all those different aspects that we apply, and every year the technology is getting more advanced. But again, to Hunter's point, data in impacts the data out. And then the other thing we want to do that's a little bit newer that we explore is process mining. So now you have in the data, you know from the beginning your business intelligence, you've done your reports, you've done the deep dive. But what is the process that the actual people are following? We have a vision, it goes out the door, it gets paid, and then it's posted, and then it's zero balance. But the reality is so much different. And so process mining allows us to look at that process once we've identified it in the business intelligence and really hone in and say what is actually happening real time. And you get to identify loops. You identify, handoffs that go back that go to somebody else that are inefficient. You identify extra touches that you're taking on every one of those accounts. And so that's what we were able to apply. And then you take that and you apply that to the predictive models. So what's the likelihood that something's going to pay? What's the expected labor costs? These are all things that we know from the historical data once we plug them in, and we are able to analyze that all together and then pick the workflow optimization. So is that robotics? A lot of times that's a fantastic thing. It's a repeatable process, especially low balance. It's a really great opportunity to save some cost and not have to quadruple your staffing, as we were just talking about. Are we working the counts at the right time in the right order? So let's go through each of these 4 steps in this sample example that we're going to walk through with the customer. Next slide, please. So for the low balance account receivable, again, some of the things we just talked about with the business intelligence reports, what we did is we did denials clusters. We identified payer anomalies, false denials, propensity to recover. And what we identified is we were getting a lot of false denials from the managed Medicaid payers. So we were also missing some of our net downs, and they were holding up co-pays, so reducing our self-pay AR. We were also had a lot of opportunities to reduce denials up front. So things like authorizations, but we were able to really hone in on what specific CPT codes, are those loaded correctly up front to identify where is the breakdown, and that process mapping really, and this intelligence reports told us exactly where to go there. And then are there opportunities to mass appeal? Things that you sometimes find is my overturn rate on an appeal, for example, is 95%. Well, that's a really powerful thing to take back to the payer and say, I now know that every time I appeal this specific denial, you're overturning it. How about you save time? I save time. We all save time, and we stop having that denial. And we are able to streamline the process for these paying. In fact, we've had organizations that are able to not only get that denial removed going forward, but also get repayment on those low dollar denials that they experience for those that they've written off. Like we had a group that we worked with recently that was repaid $1 million for low balance accounts that they were not able to get to. They finally got timely filing denials, but they were like, look, guys, you know that these were valid. They should have been paid. That's what they were able to say to the payer, and the payer agreed. So those are the kind of benefits that you can get from some business intelligence reports. Next slide, please.
Yeah, I can talk through this one. Get my camera back on here. So this is an example of a business intelligence report that we use at Advata. The way this works is there's actually a video we'll play. Fina, if you want to go ahead and play that video, actually, there are 6 elements, and when you select one of the elements, which is we're going to select last information here, the other 5 are going to adjust to show that reduced information. And you can go to remark description, select the most common one, missing patient medical records for the service in this case. Then you can go to remit pair and keep doing the same thing, and you zero in on the information that's most relevant. This is a really great way to take, again, massive amounts of information. You've got this problem, you've got all this data involved, and BI reports like this one enable you to get to what do I need to improve today to have the largest impact in this process quite quickly. Thanks, Fina. You can go to the next slide.
So the next thing we did is we did process mining and task mining. And so again, this is process visualization while it's really happening. So we all have a vision of how things happen. We know that's not the reality. And so we're able to identify where you're having redundant loops. Can we eliminate a handoff from follow up to coding and just directly send to coding if it needs to go that way from a denial? Can we eliminate sending it to for medical records and then going back for an additional set and going back again? That's a great thing to do, especially when you're talking about low balance accounts where you're constantly trying to eliminate the cost to collect, or reduce the cost to collect, I should say. And so some of the things that we were able to identify through process mining was, what's the actual performance baseline? How long does it truly take to collect in this scenario? Given what we have today, where's the variance among our follow-up agencies or our follow-up reps? So maybe I think Mary is the absolute like rock star, and I see Mary and Tammy have 2 different ways that they go through it, and one of them is actually 5 days faster. So it really helps you identify, hey, this person eliminated this step, and so that's the path that we're going to train our team on going forward. It also, like we talked about with those bottlenecks and handoffs, so giving back to that coding department, how do we eliminate or reduce that? How do we identify when we should be adjusting balances? So every single time in this scenario, when we get this no authorization denial for this CPT code, it does not pay. Why are we having someone spend an hour or hour writing the appeal, sending the appeal in, and next time coming to status it when we know we're going to get 0 payment? So we're able to auto adjust those thresholds and understand which categories that we shouldn't continue to work. And then another really great benefit, especially in today, is let's create job aids. So now we know that Mary's process is better. Let's map that out, process map that out. Let's put an SOP together. And when we bring someone on board, let's train them to follow that process because it's the most efficient. And then there's constant opportunities to structure rules in our system. So we know that, maybe you find that in OA23, we actually had a group that had that pesky OA23 with Medicaid. It wasn't moving over. And you know what? We were able to get that set up in their EMR, and so those balances automatically carried over, and there was nothing left for anyone to work. Whereas before, people were manually reviewing a report to identify if there was a gap and then having to do that work. So little things like that can make a huge difference in the overall workload. Next slide, please. And this is just an illustration, and actually, quite frankly, a nice illustration of process mining. So as you can see, the ideal path would be right down the middle. They're just doing 1, 2, 3, 4, no handoffs, no going back and forth. But the reality is, and this is a very, very zoomed out version, it's all over the place and it's messy. And so once you use that business intelligence and then you go to process mapping, you're really able to refine what you're looking for and dig in deeply to what process you want to improve and how you're going to action it. Next slide, please. So then what we do is we align those predictive models with what those findings are to date. And so that's things like I can now identify my expected labor cost. I know how much it costs from this point forward to have a coder work it. I know how much that resource is. I know once that resource has worked the claim, it takes maybe 24 minutes and that costs this much. And I can use my historical data to identify that. I can identify the propensity to recover so that I know that I shouldn't be working on specific scenarios once they've denied or once they've hit a certain time period. I know what my deadwood accounts are, so I know what's not collectible. And so that really allowed us to indicate where our negative ROI accounts are. I'm going to spend $100 to recover this account. The total balance on this account is $150, and the maximum I could get reimbursed is $30. I'm already in the hole before I started working it. Doesn't make sense to work that account. Or I know that I'm past all the filing and appeal limits on these accounts, and I know I haven't touched them because I've used my predictive model to see, do I get to those? I know I'm not going to. So it allows an organization to make really intelligent decisions that are data driven about where they're getting to in their follow-up, where they're getting in their work. Next slide, please. And then lastly, you take all of that analysis and you say, what do I do to optimize it? And the really great thing you can do is number one is you can do some RPA. So especially on your low balance, when you can't afford to triple, quadruple, 5 times the staff, that's certainly not a conversation I'd want to have with my CFO. What can I do on those repetitive, redundant tasks that allow me to streamline that work or clean up that work and bring it to a zero balance? And so we put in RPAs like auto contractual, negative ROIs. There's some business rules that we were able to do some denials. So when you have a COB denial, can I go ahead and validate that there's 2 insurances, validate the insurance through an eligibility check, flip that insurance? We can do, RPA can do appeals forms. So I have the same appeal that happens on this. This is the same exact scenario. This one, when we do appeal it, it is successful. We overturn it. And then any sorts of activities along those lines. Some other great ones that aren't represented here are things like uploading medical records, uploading to the payer portal, uploading EOBs, itemized statements, all of those documentations, tons of claim status, and you can even API out to claim status, which is a really great benefit as well. And then lastly, the other things that are really important are your sequencing and your due for work. So am I working the accounts in the right order? And so some of the things that you're able to identify in the transformation toolkit that we just went through business intelligence and process mining are what is the likelihood of payment? So I now know, hey, I need to have a really great cash month in December. And in order to do that, I need to make sure that all of the accounts greater than 30% likelihood of payment based on what we know about that claim now are going to go to a zero balance and they're going to pay. Or I need to identify my aging is out of control. I can't have anything moving from that 270 bucket further down the line. How do I identify those that are almost deadwood and go ahead and push those to the top of the work list? So sequencing is really, really important of accounts, and also due for work. Even if hey, this account needs an action taken in order to not deny. If you just did that action yesterday, you certainly don't want to do it. So making sure you have all the relevant and up-to-date information on the accounts in order to sequence them. And when we did all of these things and we combined all of those efforts together, we were able to get really great results. Next slide, please. And I think everyone that has worked in low balance world would find these results very exciting. So the first is we were able to increase cash collections on low balance AR by 100%. That's a huge deal. I mean, a lot of times those accounts are reserved, so you're not even expecting it. So that's a big, great win for the organization. Automating 50% of the follow-up activity, that's huge. So that really is knocking down how much staff you would actually need in order to work the remaining balance or the remaining accounts. Reduction in vendor placement. Most everyone today has some form of outsourced vendor that they work with. Imagine like the financial benefit to the organization if you can reduce that placement by 30%. It's a big deal. We also were able to achieve a 10% reduction in initial denials. So we worked with that group. They were able to use the intelligence to go forward and take those case studies to the upfront departments and really streamline the process. So they just eliminated those denials downstream. And then, of course, the reduction in follow-up staff. Today, I really like to think of it as a reduction. I like to calculate RPA in hours saved. I think that's the right way to do it, especially because most organizations don't have the luxury of reducing FTEs. They're really looking for how do I get through more work because I can't find, I can't keep and retain these FTEs. So if you think about RPA and the number of hours saved, that's a really great way to position it and identify opportunities. So this is a great example. This customer is obviously very excited, and we were very excited while working with them. So thank you. I'll hand it back to Hunter.
Yeah, great case study, Helen. So hopefully through that case study, through the conversation today, it's really clear the transformation toolkit is really what you need to be successful and really have meaningful, lasting impacts. The examples Helen was showing, the outcomes that were demonstrated, you could probably achieve some of those with just one of the tools or two of the tools. But if you want to have that full set and that just incredible 100% cash collection edition, it really takes the full toolkit. Let's go to the Q&A. So at the top of the screen here, you have a Q&A functionality. If you click on that, it should enable you to ask questions. Again, on the iPad, if you're on that, I believe there's like a three button, the three dots you can click on to kind of get to the same result. So we got one first question here. What existing processes and tools could be replaced by AI? Great question. Really, it's a pretty wide open field. As I demonstrated, some of the use cases are more common, some of them are a little bit more emerging. It does depend again on the access to data that you have, the current processes that you're going to be dealing with. For the most part, though, the simpler the use case or the simpler the activity that you're trying to automate, the more likely that you're going to be able to do it with AI. Really, the way to think of this is AI should be providing that kind of foundational simple work, and then your workforce should be utilizing those results to then kind of achieve a higher level function than maybe they are today. So think about those common repeatable tasks that they're doing, and that might be a good place to start with AI. Helen, anything to add there?
Oh, I think that's great. I think that's exactly right. Use those expensive resources on the more challenging problems to solve. Usually that's actually higher job satisfaction as well. So it's a win-win across the board.
Do you want to take this next one, Helen?
My organization struggles with a staffing shortage. How does AI help my staff work more efficiently? Well, very similar to what Hunter just said, it can eliminate the redundant tasks that occur over and over and over again that you're constantly having to put resources on. Things like uploading medical records or things like validating if the authorization that you applied for was approved. And so you're able to take those redundant tasks and let your team really focus on the work that matters most.
And Bo just asked, what level of human intervention and judgment will AI replace? Yeah, again, this is where it's a little bit up to you on how comfortable you are. The example I didn't give earlier was computer automated coding. Computer assisted coding is what's done broadly today, again, by 3M as one example. You could, and that's, it's not a simple function that's happening. It's a little bit perhaps more intensive than simple, but you could go as far as completely automating your coding process, and that would take some of the coding judgment out of the question. Now, that's an emerging technology. There's a lot of discomfort around doing that, rightfully so. That's a pretty impactful part of the business. It impacts everything from patient satisfaction to your bottom line. So when it comes to what can you actually replace with AI in RCM, it comes down to the use case and your level of comfort. I think Helen had mentioned this in the past. It's really good to start with something that's simple and repeatable, something that's easy, and kind of dip your toes in, get your feet wet, and kind of figure out where you're comfortable and advance from there. Any other questions? Feel free to add them to the chat. We'll hang on just for another minute or two. If there's no more questions, we'll end the webinar. Yeah, and of course, if you have any questions, if you'd like to kind of engage a little bit more about your specific use case, or I love to always kind of have these debates and conversations. So if I said something that you completely disagree with, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to have a conversation about it. Maybe you feel like AI is in a different place in the market. Let's have a conversation. And of course, Advata would love to be your technology partner in anything that you're pursuing. So feel free to reach out to myself or Helen to continue the comments. But with that, I'm not seeing any other questions come in the QA, we'll go ahead and end the webinar. Thank you for attending and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.